Engineers love automation, and Wealthfront automates your investing. As a software engineer, there are certain processes that you want to execute no matter what, like integration tests during a build. You wouldn't execute integration tests manually. You would use a continuous integration tool like CodeShip or Jenkins to automate your integration tests. Wealthfront is a tool to automate investing. Just like a continuous integration tool runs your tests automatically, Wealthfront can reinvest your dividends automatically and perform tax loss harvesting automatically. To get your first $15,000 managed by Wealthfront for free, go to wealthfront.com/sedaily and get started with Wealthfront's layer of automation on top of your portfolio. Wealthfront.com/sedaily. Check it out. It would support Software Engineering Daily, and you will get $15,000 managed for free if you sign up. Automate your investing. Get back to the things that you can't automate, like writing code. Kitematic is an open source project to simplify and streamline using Docker on a Mac or Windows machine. It allows users to get up and running on Docker with a single click and provides a user interface that makes running and managing Docker files easy. Sean Lee is the co-founder and chief product officer of Kitematic. Sean, welcome to Software Engineering Daily.
Yeah, thank you, Jeff.
So we've had containers for a while. What was new about Docker that got people, including yourself, so excited?
It was very exciting because Docker has made containers much more accessible to developers. And the timing is actually very good because of the whole DevOps infrastructure as code movement.
Right. Okay. So you think the infrastructure as code, the DevOps thing is the key matter of importance. How does that affect developer how does that affect software engineering organizations as a whole, the DevOps movement?
Right. In my opinion, it spawned from the Agile movement. Because developers have been following these process to build software in companies, but there were still silos between the development teams and the operations teams. And the existence of Docker kind of bridged this gap, bridged the silos between the two teams. Because operations are starting to apply, development practices, like putting your infrastructure on code and store them in GitHub, iterating and testing on these infrastructures. And that's what really, Docker caught their eye is that they can define their, for example, their infrastructure using, containers and images and writing scripts that use Docker. Same for developers is, developers are beginning to touch more of the operations side. How do I run the app? As you can see from popularity from platforms like Heroku, is developers self-serving and worrying about their own infrastructure. And also they are interested in Docker as well.
Is Docker a product that is only useful for running application servers? Like, is it only useful for developers and operations people, or is Docker a technology that is useful to consumers?
Well, I'd see that I definitely believe there's a potential for Docker to be a technology that's very useful to consumers in the future. For example, if maybe I'm running a shop online and there is an app store somewhere that I can just one click, it creates my shop for me along with all the infrastructure without me having to know any programming. I think that's definitely a potential for consumer market.
Right. So maybe like the .exe equivalent of a cloud application.
Right. Totally.
Okay. Interesting. And so what about on a local machine? Like, Kitematic is for using Docker on Mac, and eventually you developed a Windows application. So how does this actually work? Can I use? I mean, I don't think I can use Docker on operating systems other than Linux, right?
You can use Docker on operating systems other than Linux, but since Docker has dependencies on Linux primitives, you kind of need a hypervisor on other operating systems like Mac or Windows. So the free and option out there right now is VirtualBox, and that's why Kitematic currently has that as a dependency.
So when I install Kitematic, it installs VirtualBox as part of that installation process. That's correct, right? So what is the dependency on VirtualBox? How does that interaction actually work?
So VirtualBox actually runs a mini Docker distro inside called boot Docker. It's like an ISO, and basically that's and how Kitematic talks to VirtualBox is through Docker Machine, which is another product that bridges this gap.
What does Docker Machine do?
It's basically a developer tool that lets you create local VMs using any application like VirtualBox, VMware Fusion, but it can also provision cloud instances that are Docker ready.
Okay, got it. So now that we've talked some about this framing around Kitematic, so some of the dependencies and Docker, let's talk about Kitematic more specifically. So what is Kitematic?
Kitematic is a desktop application that helps you to use Docker on your Mac or Windows. It's almost like the, in my mind, like the VMware Fusion, right, on your desktop that talks to, the vSphere in the cloud. Right now we have a integration with Docker Hub and from Kitematic, and that's how, we kind of see it.
I'd love to get more of the origin story. Why did you build Kitematic?
So we started as a completely different company. We were called Kite, Kite, and we were a company that was doing a development environment in the cloud. Basically, what the product was like is a Dropbox, kind of like taskbar menu on your Mac. And the code you write in there gets synced to the cloud, and it runs the server and everything there using Docker. So kind of like Dropbox for your code. And then eventually, because we are using Docker underneath, we're trying to abstract it away. But as we are talking to users, they seem to be really interested in how Docker works, and their development teams wants to use Docker. So we eventually kind of pivoted and embraced Docker instead, and also made it client side only for cheaper cost and economies of scale.
Can you explain that in more detail? What do you mean by that? The economies of scale, and how do you get the cheapness?
Right, because if you do it online, you have to host it yourself. It's very expensive to create the similar experience as, I click and then I have an environment ready to go without setting up any server. And, in my mind, bringing your own server, it's a really challenging UX problem. It's very hard to do and set up. So to make it easier for us in the beginning, doing a client side makes a lot of sense, because users can just download Kitematic and start using it right away without setting up anything.
That's a really, really smart conclusion. That seems like the type of conclusion that you would only come to as a person working on the product that working with the problem that product eventually solved.
Yes.
So with that in mind, like, I mean, I guess so. Okay, so prior to that eventual product that you decided to build, you were working on this idea to get code, like the Dropbox for code or whatever. How did you get to that idea? Why was that an important problem to solve? And why? And do you feel it still has not been solved?
Okay. So how it started was I graduated from the University of Waterloo, and we have this co-op or internship program that allows you as an engineer to go and work for companies 4 months, alternating between work and school. And as I was in those companies, I find myself having a lot of trouble setting up dev environments, helping other people set up dev environments. And at the time, there was also a pitch competition. So we were thinking of an idea, and this really came to mind as something we were passionate about and scratched our own itch. And also, the good timing is Docker 0.3 was just released, and it was awesome. So we kind of just based our prototype on Docker in that version, and then applied to the competition and won it.
So in these companies that you were working with, where you were struggling to set up dev environments, did these companies use Docker?
Not at the time. It was years ago.
Right. Okay. So around that time, when you started working on Kitematic, how were you seeing other people use Docker at the time? And were they experiencing the similar problems that you ended up solving?
I almost felt like Kitematic kind of grew with how Docker grew. In the beginning, everyone kind of just heard about Docker, but not really sure how to use it yet, or apply to their own architecture. But as we were talking to users, Docker is becoming more and more popular, and there are more materials online on how to on helping people get set up. So I guess like both of us are both the companies and Kitematic were figuring it out along the way.
So when you eventually settled on the product that you ended up building, what were the early product development roles like? Like what did the software development process look like among you and you had two co-founders?
Two co-founders. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was it was really scrappy. Because we only had 3 people. I was more focused on the user experience and front end side. And Jeff is the core engineer. And Michael took care of everything other than coding, basically.
Okay, so did you I always find it interesting, like managing small team, I've worked on a number of software projects where it's just like me and another guy, or me and 2 other people, and it's always interesting allocating responsibilities and figuring out how to be productive with a really small team. Were there any problems there that you encountered, or how did you manage the separation of concerns?
I guess knowing that the areas that you should focus on is very important. Each person's specialty, what they're good at, and also really narrowing the scope of the product helps a lot with that.
Okay, so why did you decide to build a native desktop application rather than a browser experience? Or describe how you came on the Kitematic experience.
So because developers already use tools on their desktop, for their day-to-day task. For example, IDEs, code editor, terminal, they're already familiar with the concept of using a desktop tool. And we wanted to position Kitematic as a desktop tool that developers can use. And that's what really drove us to be positioned as a desktop application. And also the saving cost part that I mentioned earlier. Plus, there are advantages, technical advantages to being on the person's laptop. For example, you can pick a full path of a file system instead of having to upload files on in the web browser, which is more restricted.
Of course, more sandboxed. Tell me more about the early product days. What did the product do during its first release?
It was actually really similar, the first release of Kitematic. In fact, it had more features, such as you're able to build an image from a Docker file. It didn't have the catalog, the nice catalog that you see right now. So
the App Store.
Yeah. So essentially, you just open your source code folder, and it will pick up the Docker file and build an image for you, and then run that image as a container. That's what the first version did.
And so Kitematic wraps the Docker command line with a GUI that makes it easier to approach Docker. In a general sense, what are the challenges to wiring a command line experience to a GUI experience? I think that's a pretty general problem that sometimes people face. So how do you approach that?
To correct that, Kitematic actually used the Docker Remote API.
Oh.
Yeah, instead of the, just wrapping the command line. But we do wrap the machine CLI.
Okay.
Yeah, but we try to make the code very manageable to kind of compensate for that right now. So when there's a problem, easier for us to fix. We keep good logs and send good crash reports, and all that seems to be improving our reliability as machine catch up with the API and all that.
Sure. Okay. So for people who still may not be getting what the value of Kitematic is, there's one screenshot you can find online. You can see how you can set environment variables from the GUI,
right.
And this is so much more appealing than opening up a file in Vim or setting an environment variable from the command line. It's like a really nice experience. So I'm really curious about the perspective of how you get to, like, what do you want to map to a GUI experience from the command line? Because on a command line you could do anything, but on a GUI, you're inherently restricting the experience. So how do you choose what to map?
I think the right positioning of the product is important. It's like, what do you want it to do? A specific task. For example, I may want Kitematic to be, just for example, right? I may want Kitematic to be a tool that developers can use to build their application, to build their Docker application. And then you start thinking of features like, maybe visualizing your stack, easily creating an environment locally, better integration with Compose, giving good visual feedback on when you're making Docker files or Compose YML. So that's one example that is purely focused on the building part of the process. However, maybe you want to think of how you run Docker applications instead. then Kitematic can be a tool where you can switch between maybe different environments from local to remote machines and seeing what's going on in each environment. That's it really depends on where you see this go, right? For a specific task, because you can't put everything in the UI.
Well, so how are you seeing people use Kitematic? Like, you can also use it to stream logs. You can do all kinds of things from it. Is this like the DevOps, workspace, or how do you see Kitematic?
I see it more along the build side of things, where because Kitematic is still super, super early, and the features are not out there yet. So we try to aim the first problem that happens to Docker developers is they have trouble setting up reliably on their computer. They have to go through different tutorials. All they need to do now is download and click on Kitematic, and it sets everything up for them, and they're ready to go. It can be also be the one entry point to help people get started. So once your setup's complete, you see a nice catalog, and you can just start clicking and see containers being created, and you can see the result right away in the preview, the logs, the state of the container, and you can also see volumes. So you can see all that right away, which is gratifying for users in the first when they're first experiencing with Docker, and also it helps with setting up the dev environment part, which is necessary for building eventually.
Yeah, it's like the user feedback loop. It almost feels like a free app store. It's like you're just clicking on apps and downloading whatever you want. So when you were designing the Kitematic UI, when you're thinking about, what the Docker world could end up looking like, and you're thinking about, like, maybe do we want an app store experience? I know you didn't have that initially, but like when you were designing the Kitematic UI initially, what type of user did you have in mind?
I was envisioning developers who work day to day that just build web applications. Maybe like a skunkworks team in a big enterprise trying to build web apps. These kind of users, then slowly growing into the process and how people work in general.
Very interesting. Engineers are always looking to simplify. To simplify testing and deployment, engineers turn to CodeShip. CodeShip is continuous integration and delivery as a service. With CodeShip, your tests are executed against your code automatically whenever you push to GitHub or Bitbucket. On Software Engineering Daily, we've done several shows about DevOps, and continuous deployment is key to DevOps. It's a great way to break down the wall of confusion between development and operations. Managing your own testing infrastructure is painful. That's why you want a service like CodeShip to do it for you. If you have a huge number of tests, you can use CodeShip's Parallel CI to run all your tests in parallel. CodeShip will spin up containers on their own infrastructure to run your tests in parallel. If the code passes your tests, CodeShip will deploy it automatically to your users. Companies like Product Hunt are already using CodeShip to speed up and simplify development. To sign up for free and start shipping today, go to codeship.com. Or to try out CodeShip's new Docker platform, go to codeship.com/Docker. Can you tell me more about the Docker ecosystem, like the just how you see it evolving?
Wow, it's a harder one. Well, I personally see it becoming easier and easier, and the portability story being more complete. Because right now you kind of there's a point to which the process is not standardized. Because after you build your containers, what's next? It's a part that hasn't been like standardized yet, right? And a lot of users are looking into that and figuring out their own ways to use Docker. But I see the ecosystem maturing on both sides. On the build part, people become it become easier to build Docker applications. On the other side, deploying and managing your running apps also becomes easier. As you can see, there are a lot of startups that are taking care of the running part of things.
What are the major technical bottlenecks in the Docker ecosystem that you frequently see right now?
Well, overall, distributed systems and security, those are challenging issues that can go really deep. But I see that loss of dependency is also an issue. Like depending on VirtualBox, it actually because a first-time user, when they use Docker, they may think that, I just download Docker and run a container, it just works. But now there is intermediate setting up VirtualBox part, and that requires root and all that. Makes them wary of things. So it's more a user experience problem.
Okay. How does that get solved? I mean, how do you make people comfortable with? It's almost like when you're going through, when you're signing up for something online and you have to go through this multi-step process, and there's like a drop off, right? At each stage in the process, there's user drop off. If you have to install Docker and go through all these different phases, there's going to be drop off at each phase. Is that part of what Kitematic is? You sandwich all of those stages into a smaller user experience so that you can just click past everything with one click?
Right. So the original idea of Kitematic is you double click on the app and it shows you the steps, but you don't have to click next. So it just installs. It just installs, and installing VirtualBox is only one small step of everything. So the users are like, okay, they just install it. But the only part that's troublesome is the asking for root password part. Some people drop off there, but not a lot of people.
Interesting. So as we're talking about the ecosystem, we should talk about the social environment. GitHub created a social environment around code, and I haven't spent much time within the Docker community. Does the Docker Hub world look like the GitHub world?
I personally don't think so, because I see GitHub and Docker being very different companies, and I since there's this infrastructure as code movement, I think it makes total sense for your Docker infrastructure to lie inside GitHub. Like your config files and Docker files, compose files, and all that. And I think Docker Hub is not the same as that. Right now, Docker Hub is being more used as kind of like a parking garage. I already built the images and I'm storing them in the cloud. But the code actually is still in GitHub. But Docker Hub do have the aspect of, like auto build and all that. And I think there's a huge potential with that. Automating your workflow instead of being a GitHub clone.
Okay, so So, in GitHub, for example, people are commenting on lines of code that each other have written. So how does that map to the Docker Hub world? Are you commenting on certain automated processes, or like you're commenting on higher level things?
Right. Right now, it's actually kind of similar to GitHub, where you can see a page of your image and you can comment below. So in that sense, it's kind of similar, but it's only a feature, right? It's not really the focus of the platform right now.
So some people who use Git, they use the GitHub Desktop app for updating their code and stuff. Do you think of Kitematic as somewhat similar to the GitHub Desktop app, except for Docker?
Right, completely. We took a lot of inspiration from the GitHub Desktop app, and even the user base are quite similar people. Because there are developers who love their terminal, and using Git in the terminal, but the developers who use GitHub Desktop app are more acceptable for UIs. They use so they adopt it and they start using it, and that's the idea.
Yeah, there is this kind of bifurcation between people who prefer to use console apps and people who are more tolerant of user interfaces. Do you think is that swaying one way or another, or is this just like a thing that is going to be around till the end of time?
I do think, though, the problem with like free developer tools on the desktop is that there are not a lot of design in there, and I think the reason that some people don't like to use GUI on the computer is that they might think that it actually makes it harder to do what they do. If you're familiar with the command line, you can just give it an instruction and it gives you the result right away. In that sense, it's actually a better UI for that particular person. Right. But the CLI has its own design challenges. Kind of you kind of force the user to use memorization instead of recognition. So so that means when they first start, they can't recognize anything, so they have to look at docs and all that to get started. But if you use a UI, it actually guides you. It gives you a single entry point to branch out, and eventually you might actually go to the CLI after you are familiar with things.
Interesting. Do you think if somebody is using the CLI when a UI is available, so do you think that's a sign that perhaps the UI is just not developed properly, or is it not that clearly demarcated?
I think how a lot of people use Kitematic, at least, is they have both the CLI and the UI open. Right. The UI kind of gives them like this assurance that your thing is running and transparency into your own system. So, for example, you start creating containers and you see in Kitematic, the container just, starting popping out, streaming logs, and you're like, cool, it's working. And, there's also convenient features in Kitematic that's complementary to the CLI. Like you can switch between different containers quite easily and checking out the logs. But on the command line, you have to type a command every time, like Docker logs this container, Docker logs that container. But in Kitematic, you can just do it in one click.
Yeah, I've seen some interesting examples of where a poorly designed user interface, when it is improved, you can see great improvement in engagement. So like, for example, the most recent example I can think of for this is when Twitter switched from the star to the heart recently. You know what I'm talking about? Like if you want to like something on Twitter, in the past you could star it.
Right.
Now you click the heart button. And it sounds like a really like super small change, but apparently it increased engagement by 7%, 7 or 11% or something. Basically because when you're clicking on a star, what the heck does that mean?
Yeah,
is it like
exactly.
Is it a bookmark? Does it mean you like it? Does it mean you love it? Is it better than a heart? And then so they switch it to like, and it's much more, distinctive. It tells you what it means. So anyway, this UI stuff is interesting. But let's talk a little bit about the kind of the process from product development to eventual acquisition. We don't need to go into the actual business acquisition details, but I'm curious how this process went for you. You built the product, you open sourced it, and then gradually you moved towards talking to Docker about acquisition. Can you give me an idea of the story behind that?
So I think I kind of have to start like earlier too.
Oh, sure, go for it.
Yeah. So we built Kite in the beginning, like the cloud development environment. And eventually, there's, challenges doing that. Our cost was high, and it's very restricting. So we were figuring out the next product to build, right? We have been building different prototypes along the way, but until we get to the Valley, under a program called Lightspeed Ventures. They do the summer fellowship program that helps entrepreneurs with mentorship and connecting them to other companies. So
by the way, I think we just did a show with TopTal, and I think they came out of Lightspeed also.
Yeah, there's quite a few people.
Successful program.
Yeah, it's great. We learned a lot from our mentors, and as we are, so they've been telling us to talk to the customers, right? Talk to the users, figure out what they actually need. So we did that, and then that's when we figured out maybe we should embrace Docker and make it easier to use instead. And open source is helped us getting a lot of traction and help in the community. And I think the first version of Kitematic really hit like a niche, like a edge, a pain point. And we posted on Hacker News. It got pretty popular. And then we were approached then. Yeah. And I think, and I think the visions really aligned for Kitematic and Docker, and we really like the people, so we decided to join.
Fantastic. Okay, well, we've talked a lot about Kitematic, the product development process. I'd like to talk about your background some and your experience programming. You went to the University of Waterloo, which has a reputation as a really strong CS school. What is it about Waterloo that makes for such a strong school?
I think a lot about Waterloo is the internship and co-op program. That you get real experience as a young student in university to experience what work is like outside of school at a younger age, and a lot of interns actually get really good, get to do some really important work at the companies. Some people actually, created patents, right, in their internships, and some people have been leading projects and all that, being treated like a full-time employee. I think that, and then after you experience that, you come back to school, you have a better sense of what you want to do next. Whether you want to start your own company after you found out, there's like a pain point that I want to solve. You start, knowing yourself better and your own weakness and strength, where you want to focus next. To me, that's been really helpful. And also, the university courses itself is really packed. So you have to develop some really good, time management skills and all that to get through.
Yeah. I think I've heard, with that latter thing in mind, I think I've heard the same thing said about Caltech. So, I've seen some Waterloo students that seem to do particularly well at competitive programming competitions. Do you remember this being was there any part of the Waterloo culture where you saw a lot of people doing competitive programming?
Yes. I think when I was first year or second year, there's people talking about that like all over. I don't know where it came from, but yeah, it was definitely a thing during the time I was there.
Do you think there's a trade-off between focusing on competitive programming versus focusing on doing something more creative or like product development type of stuff?
Yeah, there was actually an interesting survey that I saw. So product-minded developers are much more needed compared to, really academic.
The triple byte survey you're talking about.
I can't remember the name, but that's one thing I saw. In my opinion, it's very important that a developer actually understands the value of the product that he or she is building. But we also need, the strong, academic, competitive programming minds to really focus on efficiency, optimization, and that part of the picture, because it's very important. For example, to make your app very snappy, right? For the users. For example, in consumer apps, they handle lots of users. It needs to be snappy.
Yeah. I was looking at your LinkedIn profile, and I saw that your interests include poker. I don't know, maybe this is a total dead-end question, but did you play a lot of poker? Did you ever play much online?
No, I actually played a lot in Waterloo.
Oh, okay.
Because there's nothing much else to do there.
Oh. Did you take it very seriously? Did you take a scientific approach, or were you just...
No, it was casual. I like the people aspect of it. Bluffing, psychology, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, certainly.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I also saw that you're interested in music. Do you write any computer music?
I do not, but I do compose Mandarin songs. In China, pop songs. Yeah.
Interesting. Do you see music as more of an art or a science?
Oh. I do see it as both, as almost as equal. At least for professional music, because you need to figure out the science behind what makes a song popular, and also sounds good. But if personally, I'm leaning more towards the art of it, which is expression. You kind of want to express yourself, what you're thinking, through music. It doesn't have to sound really nice. It could be just a simple guitar song, right? But the lyrics, and the way you express it, is the art part.
What about programming? Is programming more of an art or a science?
I do see them as very similar, programming and art. There's a book written by Paul Graham called "The Hackers and Painters." It actually talked about how similar, painting and programming are. I think a really good programmer would approach it as, you start with the broader picture first, and you start drilling down on each component, which is very similar to when you are drawing. You kind of draw the silhouette, the the outside frame of a person instead of drawing the eye in detail first. Because if you do that, your proportions may be like out of whack, right?
Right. Yeah, this is apparently how you're supposed to lay out interfaces if you're building React components also.
Yes. And that's what Kitematic uses.
Oh, you use React?
Yeah.
Okay, interesting. Well, yeah, actually, we didn't touch on that much. Like, what do you use to build the UI? Okay, so wait, you use React components, but it's a desktop application.
Yeah, that's the cool part.
How? Okay, tell me about that.
Yeah. Well, so the tech stack for Kitematic has really evolved over time as well. It started as a Django web application.
No way.
In the beginning, it's not like local at first. So when it was web, we were using Django, and then we switched to using actually Meteor.js.
Oh wow.
Yeah, because of the real time and how fast we can pump out an application and show it to people. We were heavily using Meteor and a little bit of Node.js. And then we thought about the desktop idea of making the web application on the desktop. So we just changed our Meteor code a little bit and then put that inside Node WebKit. So then you make the web application on the desktop, and that is the first version of Kitematic. It was actually Meteor plus Node WebKit.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. Can you give? I mean, I'd love to hear more. This is really weird.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. Because we already wrote the application in Meteor, so the shortest path is to put it in Node WebKit, which is a way that allows you to run a web app on your desktop.
Is Kitematic still running Meteor?
It's not anymore.
Okay. How did you migrate away, and what did you migrate to?
We basically started rewriting it after we kind of proved the concept. We started pouring energy to rewrite the whole thing in React. And instead of Node WebKit, we were using the Atom shell, which is now called Electron.
What is Atom shell? I don't know anything.
Yeah, it's similar to Node WebKit. It's like a shell which you can run your web application inside and make it look and feel native.
Right. So it makes all kinds of mappings between buttons and native components.
Not exactly. It kind of It's like a how do I say it? Like a proxy to your desktop. It's like it's almost like a container in a way that contains your web app, and you can interact it, and it exposes like OS level, the operating system primitives, like opening the dialog and all that, file picker. So those components.
Can you explain in more detail, like how do you build React components when you're thinking these are going to be rendered as desktop components?
Mm-hmm. So the look and feel of Kitematic, it's not quite native. It's using web UI. So we weren't mapping buttons and all that. So it's just basically a pure web app running inside this frame.
Okay.
But we really tried to make the UI feel native, instead of just like an web application.
Can you tell me any interesting anecdotes about the really difficult problems that you had while you were building Kitematic?
Like technology wise?
Yeah. What was the most difficult technical problem that comes to mind in retrospect?
Well, I think kind of getting started with React is a little bit more difficult because it has a higher.
Wait. Getting started with React is more difficult than getting started with Docker and all this stuff?
What? Yeah, I think it's more about the setting up part of React. Once you have everything ready, like your folder structure, like Webpack, like your build process, everything else like coding React it's much simpler. The complex part is how the life cycle works in React, like component update, component dip mount, all that, it's pretty hard to get in the beginning. But Docker, the CLI was actually pretty straightforward.
Right.
Once you have it installed.
Interesting. Well, Sean, this has been a super interesting conversation about Kitematic. Is there anything else you want to add to our conversation?
I think that's it.
Okay, great. Well, I'm really grateful for you coming on and discussing it, and I'm really happy for your success.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Well, great. Well, thanks for coming on Software Engineering Daily. I'll talk to you soon.
Okay, thanks, Jeff. Bye-bye.